This is the Dr. Duke Show.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Dr. Duke Show. I am Dr. Duke, and I'm joined today by Jake Jacobs. Jake, always good to be in studio with you.
Hello, Dr. Duke.
Always. You bring in such nice visual aids, which we will get to, things that will be very illuminating for the audience. So you can say what you want about Donald Trump. Donald Trump has created a lot of his own troubles. I get it. And if you want to accuse him of lying, if you want to persecute him, you want to... Now, apparently, the charges they've thrown at him yesterday include the potential death penalty. Okay. But at least you got to be able to go after other liars in government the same way, which we don't get. And right now, one of the most obvious, despicable liars in government today is Mayorkas, our Secretary of Jake?
Secretary of Homeland Security.
And that's supposed to secure the
Theoretically.
homeland.
Theoretically.
Yeah, there he is. This is the guy who actually looked into the camera, and we'll show you the video in a moment, and said that the border is not open. You guys are just wrong. Millions and millions of illegals in the country, every day more of them. Texas is fighting a war on its southern border. Other conservative states have sent National Guardsmen to keep people out of the so-called closed border. And now the clown show that is Mayorkas is actually suing Texas for trying to protect its borders, which they say don't need protecting anyway. You can't make this up. Watch the video. I'll turn it over to Jake.
Mr. Secretary, I want to address some of the outlandish claims my colleagues have made and put them to rest at the outset of this hearing. My Republican colleagues claim that the border is open. Is the border open, Mr. Secretary?
No, it is not.
Thank you, Mr. Secretary. The border is not open, and to say so is not only false, but is really an insult to the brave men and women of the Border Patrol who work every day to keep us safe.
Jake? Do you beat your wife? I mean, seriously. Is the border... They had a huge hearing for hours in which Republicans gave all kinds of evidence.
Empirical evidence upon empirical evidence.
Fact after fact. And this is going to put it to an end, right?
Yes.
Sir, is it open? No. Oh, well, there you go. And then he turns around and attacks the Republicans for being irresponsible and crazy. Go ahead, Jake.
Well, I got to tell you, Duke, you know that every time I go to Arizona, I go to the border. I was there 2 years ago. We saw a cartel, my wife and I, with my dear friend Tim Foley. We went last year to do a series coming out called American Crisis at the Border. I brought, here we got these carpet shoes. We've got the camouflage bag. We got all the camouflage crap, all the paraphernalia.
Are those actually were smuggled in, right? These were worn by illegals.
Right, by illegals. And it's all over the place. I was on the border with Arizona rancher Jim Chilton, 84-year-old gentleman, absolutely brilliant, wonderful man. 50,000 acres of land from his Arivaca, Arizona, 8 miles from the border, all the way down to the border, 5 miles of open border. Jim takes me in his truck down to that border with the huge, what he called the Biden gaps, showing me evidence upon evidence of what the cartel is doing. In fact, we saw four cartel guys going up the hill with all their camouflage, with all their paraphernalia. And so when you see this Mayorkas dude, this character, lying, just blatantly lying. I think it's interesting that when Governor Abbott, in March of 2021, created Operation Lone Star, he used the, what do they call it in Texas, the public security system, Texas security system. They used the National Guard. They reinforced the border. They were able to slow down illegal aliens coming into the country, and especially since Title 42 ended, and Joe Biden and Mayorkas are furious. So they're desperately trying to find a way. So one of the ways to muzzle Abbott is Mexican muzzles. In essence, they're saying, because of the Center for Biological Diversity, they're saying, you know, there are literally dozens and dozens of possible creatures that could be extinct, and we've got to open up the border and not allow these buoys that they have down in the Rio Grande area, in the Del Rio area. What they're saying is, you can't be doing this right now because you're hurting the Mexican muzzles.
So what you're telling me is that what we knew, there's so many angles here. You're telling me that climate change is being used to prop the border up to bring more illegals. Meanwhile, you've been noticing the news, right? You've got places all across the country who are now giving voting rights. In Illinois, right south of us, the radical lefty governor, globalist, has allowed non-citizens to become police officers.
That's right. That's right.
Think about this.
That's the same guy we were talking about when it
last
comes
week.
to all the LGBT money going into Illinois.
So, not to belabor the obvious, but if you think about those parallels between the fall of the Roman Empire and what's happening here, one of the things that happened, the peace was kept when Rome became very decadent, when the Republic collapsed, suddenly Romans didn't want to fight as soldiers. Look what's happening in our country. American interest in the military has plummeted. There's a poll just last week, less than about 23%, I think.
They're demoralized. You're right.
Completely demoralized. Young people want nothing to do with it. They have no interest in science. Can't blame them. Who wants to go to the military to learn about DEI? So, and now we've got in Illinois, we have illegal immigrants doing oversight about American citizens. They're police officers, not Americans. I mean, there's a really remarkable parallel to what did in Rome. In Rome, Romans stopped fighting for themselves, and they hired these kinds of militias to do the fighting. And, of course, the quality and the loyalty went away. Now you're beginning to see some of across the country, the consequences that are way even bigger than who's simply crossing the border.
You know, it's interesting because Victor Davis Hanson, the brilliant Stanford historian, his latest book, The Dying Citizen, brings up exactly what you're saying. Everything you just said is exactly what he puts in there. There's a denial of our constitutional republic rule of law. There's a denial of civics, citizenship. There's a denial of actually teaching young people in America what it means to be an American citizen who understands civic responsibility. And there is this opening floodgate of globalism, which in essence says borders don't matter, the rule of law doesn't matter. If you want to quote Joe Biden, surge to the border. And this is this bizarre Orwellian, Huxleyan world, where this dystopic world of the border is closed, or is closed, which is a lie, and they are the ones that profoundly exasperated the problem, and they're lying to the American people.
Well, and the other thing we should point out about that is they cynically say that borders don't matter, but they do for non-Western countries, right? There's no such thing as a border for America, but in Venezuela, right? In some of the southern,
Hungary's got borders.
Exactly.
Greece has got borders. Turkey has borders.
Good luck trying to cross borders in places in Africa.
The Pope has a border.
Yes, he does. Nancy Pelosi has a fence border around
the White
her
House has
It's just Western countries that borders don't matter. Can you imagine if 1 million white people suddenly descended upon Mexico and wanted immediate citizenship? They wanted to become police officers right away without citizenships. They wanted handouts from the government. The whole world would consider that to be an invasion. An invasion. But when the other shoes on the other foot, this is the crazy arguments they come out that if we block the borders and stop the onslaught, environmental issues are creatures are going to die, Jake.
Well, this is the point. They're showing.
Real quick. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
I'll forget this.
Yeah.
So a full-grown human being can get through the fences and get around the border security. You're telling me a toad couldn't do it? Telling me a bird can't do that? A salamander or a lizard can't do that? This is what they want us to swallow?
I gotta add this. So my buddy, the rancher Jim Chilton, was in a case called Chilton versus the Center for Biological Diversity. When Trump became president, that Center for Biological Diversity said there were 92 potentially extinct creatures on the border, so therefore we cannot build the wall. We cannot have anything that might come between those creatures and the border wall, et cetera,
and
et cetera.
More of the same dirt on the other side?
Well, here's
it's
what
a
happened.
desert.
This Jim Chilton, these tree-hugging fanatics, they went after a chub. It's like a little smelt fish on his property. And he hired some of the best experts of land management from University of New Mexico, and they won the case in Arizona Supreme Court.
Jake, we're going to take a break. We're not done with this. We've got more. We've actually got a congresswoman, a Republican from Wyoming, had the guts to look at Mayorkas and basically call him out for being a liar. We'll be right back. Back now with Jake Jacobs, and we're still talking about this outrageous situation where all this pressure is being put, all these investigations into Donald Trump, and Trump, felony after felony charge. Hunter Biden, sweetheart deal, right? The obvious lies of Hunter Biden now are being covered by the media. They didn't really mean anything. None of this had to do with Joe, even though he was on the phone. All the lies, right, that we're actually pursuing and underscoring for the sake of Democrat peace. But when it comes to the border, the biggest liar of all on the left is Mayorkas. We talked about how our director of Homeland Security insists to a congressional committee that the borders aren't open, and so we finally have some pushback. This is a Wyoming politician, Republican. Listen to what she had to say about this.
Mr. Mayorkas, I actually really want to thank you as well for coming here today, for your performance. I have watched with absolute fascination as you have danced and dodged and lied. Yes, lied. We know you've lied, you know you've lied, but more importantly, the American public knows that you lied throughout your testimony today. And yet you believe that you and your fellow architects of the censorship industrial complex think that you should be able to determine what is and isn't true, and what is and isn't untrue. You are the walking, talking epitome of the very tyrant that our forefathers recognized would gravitate towards government service. And it is because of people like you that they drafted the First Amendment.
That is Representative Harriet Hageman, and this is the wonderful Republican who took Liz Cheney's seat.
One person can make a profound difference.
And I love it. She has the guts to call him a liar. How many Republicans will never do that? This guy is a liar, and she called him on it.
Absolutely brilliant. And she said, and you're the kind of person that the founding fathers warned us about. You are a tyrant. You're lying to the American people. I think it's interesting. When Governor Abbott's Operation Lone Star was profoundly successful, and they're desperately trying to find ways of destroying that success, what's happening now is, I just talked to my friends down in Tucson. They said that the new mantra is Tucson, here we come, because what's happening is the cartel recognizes the success of Operation Lone Star, so they're shifting from Yuma to Nogales to Aravaca to that whole area, Sasabe, where now they're floodgating through that part of Arizona.
And the Democrats are in the ascendant party in Arizona. It's becoming a blue state. They want no part of Arizona. Texas. They're going to move to Arizona. Hageman, who replaced Liz Cheney, who is one of the more despicable rhinos in my lifetime. I mean, she's as bad.
Worse than Paul Ryan?
She's not as bad as Paul Ryan, because most Republicans recognized her as a traitor. She didn't fool anybody. Paul Ryan from our pathetic state of Wisconsin.
He fooled a lot of
He's
people.
still fooling them.
He fooled me for a while.
He's still fooling them. People still don't know what a scummy liar he turned out to be.
We worked with him years back.
Absolutely. You think Evers is a problem for the state of Wisconsin? The biggest problem politically this state has right now is people like Paul Ryan, because people think they are actually Republicans when they're not. So having said that, here's a tweet that Harriet Hageman sent out, which I think says it very well. She doubles down. Real quick, point of order, Jake. Now that it's X, not Twitter, do we call them tweets now? What do we call them? X's?
Xers.
Is that right? Is our producer? They sent out an X. I did not know that. Okay. So she sent an X out, and it says the following. Isn't it ironic that the person in charge of the Biden Mis- and Malinformation Agency spent the day lying to Congress? Secretary Mayorkas has failed the American people, and it's time for him to resign or be removed for his position. And he's not going to do either of those things.
No.
He's not going to resign. No one's going to get rid of him. And after he's done and Biden's done, when he's a citizen again like Trump is, no Republican is going to try to jail him or punish him for his outright traitorous behavior.
To quote Marxist Bill Ayers, the non-friend friend of Barack Obama, guilty as hell, but free as a bird.
Free as a bird. That's right. The warping of the American justice system. The Constitution, we made the alignment with ancient Rome. Looking back historically, we know when Rome ceased to be a republic and how quickly the dangers piled up. It's hard for me. You're more optimistic sometimes than me, Jake. You're also, 50, 60 years older than me. You're more optimistic than I am. But it's hard for me to look at the state of affairs today and to honestly argue that we are still a constitutional republic. Right now, ironically, the only thing that seems to be pursuing the constitutional order is, ironically, the Supreme Court. Because 10 years ago, the Supreme Court was completely making left-wing after left-wing decision, anti-constitutional. Enjoy it while you got it.
And
because
thank you, number 45, Donald Trump.
Right.
Thank you very much. And remember, Joe Biden years and years ago with Ted Kennedy was going after Clarence Thomas because he dared to believe in natural law, the laws that the founders of this country believed in.
Yep.
And that's a part of that very vicious left-wing wokocratic worldview that they're carrying throughout this country.
I mean, is it fair to say, Jake, that when and if the court goes the other way, when it's packed with liberals, let's say that you had one day in the next 10, 12 years, you have 6 liberals and 3 conservatives.
God forbid.
I mean, what's left then?
Nothing.
What left
No.
is left?
It's the only thing saving us at this point.
Exactly.
You're right. Yeah.
Exactly. And you can see how much heat is being put on the conservative justice, even though some of them aren't that conservative. I don't consider John Roberts to be a conservative.
That's right.
The more I hear from Amy Barrett, she's not a
big disappointment.
Either. Yeah.
We don't have time for that, but big disappointment.
Yep.
I'm sorry. Yeah.
You've got Alito, and you've got Clarence Thomas,
Yep.
and you've
Scalia?
got
No.
Gorsuch most of the time. That's it. The other 2 are waverable, and they've got and no one complains about the fact that the liberals, the 3 liberal justices, all women, non-wise anything, right? The 3 women, lock, stock, and barrel, right? Completely against any constitutional rule that comes down, defending. Pretty much just rewriting the Constitution. So a third of the court right now is completely uninterested in the U.S. Constitution, thinks it needs to be apparently replaced. We have one more story before we leave you today, and this is the one that with which Jake has a personal connection. This is RFK, who's made a lot of news on the Democrat side. He's kind of a half kook, half warrior against woke politics. You actually had a chance to meet him briefly, but talk about the story, Jake. Jake, it's about RFK Jr. denying being an anti-Semite. When the left calls you an anti-Semite, that's when you know you're probably saying the right things.
Duke, I've been called an anti-Semite when I dared say that the Frankfurt School were a number of Jews who rejected Judaism and the Judeo-Christian worldview. Therefore, that movie Koch brothers came out and said I was an anti-Semite.
Yep.
I've lived in Israel. I've taught on the Holocaust. I mean, it was an outright lie. But the point is, that's the typical race card anti-Semitic movement that they do it all the time. And, I got to tell you something, if I can wax nostalgic here a little bit. I read this book, To Seek a Newer World. That's Robert Kennedy, who was assassinated. I read it in 1968. I was 12 years old. When he died, I cried. I have to show you. Here is the newspaper. Bobby Kennedy dies, Escanaba Daily Press. And then the other one was from the Appleton Post-Crescent, Senator Robert Kennedy shot. I got to tell you, my father was a Hubert Humphrey, FDR Hubert Humphrey Democrat. I was for Robert Kennedy. Well, a couple years back, I'm in Milwaukee on my way to Santa Barbara to speak for EF. I come up the escalator and I see Robert Kennedy Jr. and I go, "Oh my God, Kennedy!" And I start telling him about everything I just said to you. And he just smiles and we start having a little conversation about things that we were doing. And he says, "Why don't we take a pic?" So that pic you're seeing there is with the gentleman who's running for president of the United States as a Democrat. And he's also written a great book, a phenomenal book called The Real Dr. Fauci, Bill Gates, Big Pharma, and the Global War on Democracy and Public Health. And this is what the Democrats, the wokocrats fear. They fear the truth. How he exposes what's going on in the World Economic Forum, with the United Nations, with Bill Gates, etc.
It's doubly dangerous that it's a Kennedy, right? If this was somebody with not
name
not
recognition,
that patristic background, somebody who did not have those bona fides, they'd ignore him. And I go back to this question about anti-Semitism too. It is remarkable when you think about the degree to which, well, for instance, it was obviously, Jake, right? It was a Jewish person who shot and killed Bobby Kennedy. Wasn't it?
No,
who was it?
Sirhan was a Palestinian Muslim who hated Bobby Kennedy because he supported Israel and the Jewish people.
Yeah, the whole thing is just crazy. I mean, when you start hearing the left, who are the biggest anti-Semites in the country, they're the ones who despise Israel. They're the ones. They really despise Jews who are practicing Judaic
Orthodox Judaism. They hate Ben Shapiro, Mark Levin.
Hate that. Yep. It's only the secular. I mean, they're what, ethnically Jewish? They're certainly not religious Jewish. They're the ones on the Democrat Party who are ethnic Democrat Jews hate Orthodox Jews, hate Israel. So when they start calling Republicans anti-Semites, it's the same argument you make about racism, right? Despite being the party of the Ku Klux Klan and all that business, right?
Jim Crow.
Opposing civil rights. No, that's now a Republican problem, right? When they hit you with that out, you almost got to smile. When they did it to you, you're a total Judeophile. I've known you for a long time. For them to call you an anti-Semite simply because you're pointing out history is unbelievable.
By the way, you know who defended me? It was the John Birch Society.
Yes.
The John Birch Society wrote an actual letter defending me, saying that this guy's the furthest thing from an anti-Semite around. And,
the society, society is routinely called anti-Semitic, and it's remarkable. I've been involved with it for 15 years now, 12 years. I've met Jewish members. I have not heard a single anti-Semitic comment about anybody. I mean, in fact, the society is always talking about the greater Judeo-Christian culture. That's right. So again, when you're over the target with these guys, these leftists, they're going to bring out these slurs.
You know, I think we have a video related to this topic.
Take a look.
We do? Okay.
But I was shut down, and that is why the First Amendment's important. Debate, congenial, respectful debate, is the fertilizer, it's the water, it's the sunlight for our democracy. We need to be talking to each other. Now, this is a letter that many of you signed, many of my fellow Democrats. I've spent my life in this party. I've devoted my life to the values of this party. This 102 people signed this. This itself is evidence of the problem that this hearing was convened to address. This is an attempt to censor a censorship hearing. The charges in this, and by the way, censorship is antithetical to our party. It was appalling to my father, to my uncle, to FDR, to Harry Truman, to Thomas Jefferson, as the chairman referred to. It is the basis for democracy. It sets us apart from all of the previous forms of government. We need to be able to talk, and the First Amendment was not written for easy speech. It was written for the speech that nobody likes you for.
Now take a moment and explain to us what he's in trouble for. Why are they calling him an anti-Semite? What was it allegedly that he said?
It was an off-the-record remark about the vaccine, the COVID-19 vaccine, in relationship to Ashkenazi Jews and I think maybe Chinese, that they took out of context, distorted, and said, therefore, he hates Jews.
What was he trying to say?
You know, I don't know enough at this point because I'm waiting to see what was going on there. I think he was, I don't know. I don't know if it was like related to sickle cell anemia when it comes to black population. I don't know enough to know on that.
Well, and he certainly backed down from that and made an abject apology, saying that he never intended to hurt the Jewish people who have suffered, in his words, more than any other race. And that's going to wrap up the show. If you have any questions, comments, or want to support the show, simply visit drdukeshow.com. And for all of us at the show, and for Jake Jacobs, thanks. We'll see you next time.